Hello students, a very good day to you. Today we'll be doing a very famous poem, The Patriot by Robert Browning. Now Robert Browning was a famous poet of the Victorian age. He was the 19th century poet and he was a contemporary of Lord Tennyson. His famous poem you all may have read in your junior classes, The Pied Piper of Hamelin. Now, this poem is written in the form of a dramatic monologue where a man who is being led to the gallows is recounting his tale. Now, a monologue is where a person speaks. For example, when you have in your own class a teacher speaking and you're just listening to the teacher, that would be called a monologue. But when there are others talking in between also, then that would be dialogues. So, this person or the speaker, he recalls that exactly a year ago he had been led down this very street with crowds of people cheering him and scattering roses in his path. He was a hero being welcomed by his adoring fans. A year later, he was tried, convicted, and he was being led away to be put to death. So, he describes all this in the poem. How short is public adulation and memory, and how fickle is praise and glory. A year ago, roses and fame, and today he's left with nothing but shame and death. This is a grim reminder that life is uncertain. Yet, the poem ends on a note of optimism. Robert's own philosophy that God's in his heaven and all's right with the world is the note on which the poem closes. The patriot believes that it is God who will reward him according to his true merit. Now, the theme of the poem, before we move on to the explanation of the lines and of the various stanzas of the poem, let me brief you with the theme of the poem. The theme of the poem, the first could be the fickle nature of the crowd. Now, the crowd which is shown here by the poet is actually a very fickle-minded crowd, because in the beginning, the same very crowd is in a state of jubilation, is in a state of cheering the speaker, whereas a year after, that same crowd is excited to move up to the gallows to see the execution of the same person who was once in glory and in power. The second, the ephemeral or swiftly passing away nature of fame. Now, the poem tells us how gradually, a year back, the speaker was full of fame, full of praises all over the place. And a year afterwards, that same person is humiliated. Third, the darling of the crowds today becomes the most hated person of the following day. So we are made aware of the public's fickleness, the rise and fall of glory, and the poem ends with an optimistic note about the speaker's faith in God. Now, before we move on, we must understand the tone of the poem. The tone is reflective as the speaker looks back to the events of a year ago. He reminisces about those golden days when he basked in the adulation of the crowds. He remembers those glorious days. Initially, the power that he feels is heady, but it soon ebbs away as the people turn their backs on him. The end of the poem has a tone of resignation as the speaker leaves everything in God's hand. Now, some of the salient features of the poem. Children, I have made a note of these and you may note them down also, that they'll be of great help to you. The poem is the form of a dramatic monologue, a form of poetry popularized by Robert Browning. The patriot, a person who has done something great or noble for his country, is the person speaking to us as he narrates his transition from love, honor, and fame to hatred, notoriety, and humiliation. The poem is marked by vivid imagery and poetic images. And now, the explanation of the poem The Patriot, stanza-wise. It was roses, roses all the way, with myrtle mixed in my path like mad. The house roofs seemed to heave and sway, the church spires flamed, such flags they had. A year ago on this very day. The speaker of the poem is a patriot who narrates the story of his golden past. He remembers a day, a year ago, when he was given a grand welcome on his arrival to the town. And that very day, it was like roses and roses all everywhere. People had thrown roses and myrtle in his path. Now myrtle, my dear children, a type of sweet-smelling white flowers. The house roof seemed to heave and sway. Heave and sway means to rise and fall. Now there was such a lot of cheering done by the crowd, by the people. They were all cheering for their hero who had been victorious, who had achieved great power. And so they were all as if laying roses in his path bestrewn with roses and with myrtle. The house roofs were so full of people that they seemed to be heaving and swaying from side to side. The church spires flamed, such flags they had. Now spires, church spires are tapering or conical structures found on the top of the church building. And these church spires, they had flags on them. So the spires seemed to be flaming with flags. The spires were like flames. So here the poet has tried to use irony. Now the poet tells us that this entry of the patriot echoes that of Christ into Jerusalem and is followed by a similar reversal of public acclaim into disgrace and later on death. So here the speaker is telling us that on this very same day, a year ago, there was such a lot of cheering, such a lot of praises for this man who had achieved such a lot of power. And the church spires that were decorated with beautiful flags, and he was thus given a grand welcome on this very same day. And later on, he goes on to tell us that on this day now, just a year later, he's being taken in for execution. And the people are shouting again, but they're not cheering for him. In fact, earlier he was being treated as their hero and now as a traitor. The poet here gives us an image of overcrowding in order to show the speaker's importance. And the lines here also suggest that he is a celebrated figure, one that everyone wants to see. So a year back, it was like this, how he was cheered for, how the people were full of jubilation. And later, on the very same day, a year later, he faced humiliation. So this is all about stanza 1. Now we move to stanza 2. The air broke into a mist with bells, the old walls rocked with the crowd and cries. Had I said, good folk, mere noise repels, but give me your son from yonder skies. They had answered, and afterward, what else? So here, children, you may underline the word mist. Now, mist actually is small droplets of water, or you could also say a thin layer of cloud. So this mist with bells is referring to the sound of the bells covering the whole atmosphere. The church bells, they are ringing with great fervor. Now this is a very good example, my dear students, of auditory imagery. By reading the lines, you can very well, with the help of auditory imagery, you can very well imagine those bells ringing. The old walls rocked with the crowd and cries. Now the walls of the houses of those people, they were as if rocking with their cries and their shouts. They were shouting with joy. They were cheering for their hero. It was as if the bells rang to announce his coming. The old walls of the building seemed to shake with the crowd and their loud cries. And they were momentarily swayed by him to such an extent that even if he had asked for the sun, had I said, good folk, mere noise repels, but give me your son from yonder skies. Here the poet is trying to say that even if he had asked for the sun, they would have offered him the same. So I'll explain this line again to you, children. Had I said, good folk, mere noise repels. Mere noise repels here means mere noise disturbs me. The speaker is saying that just these shoutings and cheerings are just disturbing. So they're doing nothing but only disturbing. And then he goes on to say that even if he had said that he wants the sun, they would have agreed to get him the sun from the faraway skies. And then they would have asked, what else? So, in these lines, the poet is trying to show that the speaker was over-ambitious. His fame was such that it had caught a lot of excitement in the people. And these people, they expressed their joys with their cries. They kept ringing the church bells so vigorously that the air broke into a mist of sound. And this gesture of the people gives the speaker the power. There was a sense of power in their adulation. So here in this line, when the speaker says, "Had I said, good folk, mere noise repels," he's like acting like a conductor, and he's asking the people not to shout so much, because he says that the noise disturbs him. So I hope this stanza is clear to you, children. And now we'll move on to the third stanza. Alack, it was I who leaped at the sun. Alack means alas. Now in this stanza, the poet has tried to show the regret of the speaker, that he regrets it, that the state in which he is at present is because of his aspirations. He had real high aspirations. So, alack it was I who leaped at the sun, to give it my loving friends to keep. Now the speaker regrets that it was he who leaped at the sun. Leaped at the sun means who was over ambitious for power. It was he who was over ambitious for power. And he wanted this, or he wanted to do this just for the sake of his friends. It was the speaker who went ahead to do every possible thing in the public's best interest. And it was the speaker who went ahead in every possible way. He made the impossible possible for them. Now you can say one thing, that the speaker here in this stanza is trying to justify everything, because things have changed in a year's time. So he's just trying to justify, and he's trying to say that it was because of my friends, my loving friends, and the people and the crowd, that I was so overambitious, and I wanted to achieve things just for the sake of them. Now, referring to the sun here, now, children, you must note it down that here the poet has made a mythological reference to Icarus, who was the son of Daedalus, who dared to fly too near the sun. Daedalus and Icarus, according to Greek mythology, both were imprisoned and in the island of Crete. Daedalus created a pair of wings made of feather and wax and warned his son Icarus not to fly too close to the sun. But the son did not pay heed to his father's advice, and as a result, when he flew close to the sun melted. The heat of the sun melted his wings, and he plunged into the ocean, and so he met his death. So here the poet is trying to tell us about his over-ambitiousness, and yes, my dear children, we must not fly too high. It's always to be in moderation. The speaker tried to overreach for his friends. It was a show of his power and his capabilities, though he did have some loving friends. not man could do have I left undone. He said, nothing that man could do have I left undone. Means I have done every impossible thing I've made possible for my friends. And you see my harvest, what I reap this very day. And then he says, just as the saying goes, as you sow, so shall you reap. So he sowed overconfidence and he reaped sorrow. He was carried away by all the adulation of the people around him. So, we can say that the speaker now actually feels dejected at his harvest. Everything has changed for him in a year. So, in other words, the poem is trying to give us a message that one should not be overambitious, because one tends to meet his downfall certainly if one is overambitious. And this speaker was carried away by all the adulation of the people around him. And the last line says, this very day now a year is run. Now here, this very day now a year is run is a repetition of the last line of the first stanza. Now this is actually a dramatic monologue, and this repetition is a refrain. The lines are repeated. So this here the poet is giving us a time element and the importance of time here. So it was only a year ago. The speaker saying that he tried to do something which was impossible. So everything should be in moderation. He was drunk in the wine of fame and success. He did something which did not go down well or augur well with the people. So he's simply trying to justify himself, and perhaps there is a sense of regret and also anger at the crowd. So this is all for today, my dear children. Hope you've understood all these 3 stanzas well, the tone of the poem as well as the theme of the poem. Please go through all this once again, and we'll continue with the poem on the next turn. Thank you.